Okay. All right. Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Demai. We're going to be learning Perek Aleph, Halacha Dalet, concluding the Perek and beginning, God willing, Perek Beis, starting with Halacha Aleph. We will be learning Daf Yud Gimel. We left off on Daf Yud Gimel all the way on the top of the Amid. And let's quickly review our sugya. First of all, the Mishnah said that the Mai, minimally, b'di'evad, could be tithed out of order, which would mean Meiser Sheni, and then Meiser Rishon in order to separate Trumas Meiser. Then we had B'Shem Rabbi Yechanan that even Lechatchila, the Mai could undergo its tithings out of order. And the Gemara then asked the question that normally, when you separated Meiser Sheni, redeeming that Meiser Sheni, Taka making it into Chulin, will never allow that Chulin to be designated as Meiser Rishon. Why? Because since produce from which Meiser Sheni is removed is already rectified from Meiser Rishon, means produce from which the Meiser Sheni is removed is already rectified, it's not connected at all to Meiser Rishon. It's already Mesukin from Meiser Rishon, so it can never become Meiser Rishon itself. However, based on the fact that when it comes to the Mai, you can separate, let's go with Lechatchila, Meiser Sheni, prior to separating Meiser Rishon. So this produce is produce that's not yet rectified from Meiser Rishon. So therefore, the Gemara was wondering, and indeed Rabbi Yechanan says, even after you separate it as Meiser Sheni, if you want, you can redeem it, and it itself can be separated from Meiser Rishon. That was the rule. The Gemara had a kasha on Daf Yud Beis against the rule of Rabbi Yechanan. The kasha was asked by Rav Sheshes when his ruling was brought to Babel. From the Mishnah that tells us that when you have the two kalkolois and you want to be ma'aser, Meiser Rishon, Meiser Sheni, mizu, from this one for that one, from that one to this one, how the Mishnah says that based on the rule that you cannot be ma'aser, min aptur ala chiyuv, your second statement did not work. Which means that in the case you have barrel A, barrel B, basket one, basket two. When you said on basket one that your Trumas or Meiser should come from basket two, that statement was effective. When you then said, and the Meisers from basket two should come from basket one is already exempt, that statement is ineffective. Which means that you have to separate from basket two the Meiser Rishon, Meiser Sheni for basket one and for basket two. And the Baraisa said that the number that you have to separate was the 44.4. And we're not going to go through that again. The kasha, the Gemara is asking against Rabbi Yechanan, why do you have to separate 44.4? Why do you have to separate Meiser Rishon and then Meiser Sheni from basket B on basket A? And then again separate Meiser Rishon and Meiser Sheni from basket B on basket B? Why would we at least not be allowed after you resolve basket A? That means you separated 11.1 from Meiser Rishon, from basket B to be Mesakin basket A. Then you separated another 11.1 Sa'ah from basket B to be Mesakin the Meiser Sheni from basket A. Why did you take the Meiser Sheni, redeem it, now it's Chulin, use it again for it to be the 11.1 Meiser Rishon separation that you have to separate for basket B, and then you only have to separate one more time 11.1 from basket B to be Mesakin basket B from Meiser Sheni, meaning all you need to separate at the end is 33.3. That was the kash. Is araya that Meiser Sheni cannot be redeemed and then made into Meiser Rishon, a kash against Rabbi Yechanan. The Gemara today is going to try to say one case is not compared to the other, and the Gemara is going to say that these two cases are exactly the same. And therefore, the kasha against Rabbi Yechanan will stand. This will more or less be the first part of Daf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph. The final part of Daf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph will be going back to the Halacha Daled Mishnah, and we're going to speak a little bit more about Sicha Kishasiya, And you should know that there are applications to Sicha Kishasiya in many other areas in halacha, and we'll speak about two. Some of them, one of them was mentioned when we were learning the Mishnah. And on Daf Yud Gimel Amud Beis, we're going to move on to the second chapter. Second chapter is going to be based on a rule that we learned in Perek Aleph. We learned in Perek Aleph that the Mai only applies to produce that's grown in Eretz Yisrael. And not only that, in areas that were consecrated by the Oil Bavel, as we mentioned, because even the areas that was Taka Mugdash, the Kedushas Eretz Yisrael from Oil Mitzrayim, that Kedusha was removed, the Rambam Paskins, by the Golus Bavel, Kibush. But we have to, whenever we speak about Kedushas Eretz Yisrael, that Kedusha was imbued again when the Yidden that came up through the leadership of Ezra reestablished Eretz Yisrael. Moreover, we learned in the previous chapter that if you purchase produce outside that area, could be that produce was grown in Israel, but we don't know that. When we don't know that, we presume that it's local produce. So when you buy produce b'chutz la'aretz, you don't have to take off the mai. Really, you don't have to take off trumas umaises. What we will begin this second chapter with is that there are exceptions to that rule. And as the Mishnah will show us, that there were certain products at the time the Mishnah were compiled, certain food items, that they were so unique to Eretz Yisrael, meaning that type of high quality only grew in Eretz Yisrael. Those items, even if you buy them in the countries near Eretz Yisrael, you can't say we bought it out of Israel. You don't have to worry about the mai. You do have to worry about the mai. And the same thing in the converse. When you buy a product in Eretz Yisrael, maybe it was grown outside b'chutz la'aretz, maybe. But the rule is that you presume it was grown locally. However, we will see exceptions to that also. That there are certain, the Mishnah will speak about a certain type of rice, that there was a certain type of rice that was so inferior, none of that ever grew in Eretz Yisrael. So if you buy that in Eretz Yisrael, since it's clearly known to all that it was grown b'chutz la'aretz, you don't have to worry about the mai. That's going to be more or less the rule of the Mishnah, and the Gemara is going to elaborate on that. And now, let's come right back inside to Daf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph. Rabbi Chananya, the way we are learning the sugya, is an attempt to respond to the kasha of Rab Sheshes by differentiating the Mishnah Braisa, right, versus the din of Rabbi Yechanan, by saying Taman. Taman means, in the case of Rabbi Yechanan, the normal case, you bought the mai from an Amoritz, and let's go with Rabbi Yechanan, you can lechatchila separate Meiser Sheni, then you have to only really separate Trumas Meiser, but don't forget, to separate Trumas Meiser, you really have to designate 10% as Meiser Rishon to be able to have from what to separate the Meiser Min HaMeiser. And that Meiser Rishon, says Rabbi Yechanan, if you don't want to lose product, if you have no money issue, but you have product issue, separate only 10% Meiser Sheni, redeem it on money, and then use that for the Meiser Rishon and the Meiser Min HaMeiser. So over there, why does Rabbi Yechanan say you can do it? Because Kri Shehu Toivel Urishain Ulasheni, because you are separating it from a pile, which is the Mai, that needs to have both Rishon and Sheni separated from it, Chevra. And since you separated Sheni before Rishon, that means that none of this produce was already Mesukin L'Rishon. It was not rectified as far as Meiser Rishon is concerned. So therefore, it itself could become the Meiser Rishon. However, we're attempting to answer, but here, meaning here, the Braisa that specified that the total number is 44.4, and the focus is not on the number. It's on the fact that you have to separate 4 separate separations. You are separating everything from basket B. But the Seder is, you separated separation number 1, Meiser Rishon, from B to rectify A. Then you separated again from basket B. Second Meiser separation, Meiser Sheni, to rectify the Meiser Sheni from basket A. Then you have to separate again Rishon and Sheni from B to be Misakin B. Now, when you finish to be Misakin for the first one, Baram Hache, Sheni Shenetakan Machmas Rishon, when you separated the second 11.1, That's the one that we are saying you should be able to reuse. No, when you separated that other 11.1, my friends, don't forget, you're doing it for basket A. Basket A already was misukin for my sedisha. You first separated my sedisha, 11.1. Then you separated my sedishani from basket A to fix basket A. But when you separated the second 11.1 as my sedishani for basket A is already misukin lamai sedisha. We don't have to worry about my sedisha. We don't need. There's no connection to my sedisha. Maybe that's why the 11.1 that you separated Lemaisa Sheni for basket A can never become Maisa Rishon because basket A was resolved. There is no more Maisa Rishon issue. But Sheni Shenetaken Machmas Rishon. Machmas Rishon would mean after you separated Rishon, that cannot be done. And maybe that's the answer. So the Amar Rav Mana, the way we'll learn the Gemara, this is only one of the ways of learning the Gemara, that's not an answer. Rav Sheshes says kasha is a kasha. And let me say it by heart. I'll tell you simple. Guys, don't forget, you are separating everything from basket B. I know that when you took off the Ma'aser Sheni from basket B to be Mesaken basket A, that was the last thing you needed to do for basket A. I know that. But in basket B, you know what you didn't do yet? You were not Mesaken Ma'aser Rishon on basket B at all. In other words, the product that you are using, you're using the Kalkola number 2. That product has in it Ma'aser Rishon that wasn't yet separated because basket B was not Mesukan at all. So it is mamish like the Mai. It's mamish like the Mai. Since this that you took out still has in it Ma'aser Rishon, that's because you didn't separate Ma'aser Rishon from basket B. If Rabbi Yechanan is right by the Mai, mamish, the same thing should be over here. It is shaykh to Ma'aser Rishon because it's not Mesukan the Ma'aser Rishon. Basket B is not Mesukan the Ma'aser Rishon. So you should be able to reuse it if there is such an option. And the fact that the Braisa never gave that option, the Mishnah never gave that, the Braisa really didn't give that option, is an ayah that Rabbi Yechanan is wrong. He says you're wrong. And the Chanami, like we said, you resolve the Rishon for the first basket. But there is still the issue that you did not rectify, which is that basket B has to have Ma'aser Rishon removed from it. So it is the same. And yet you cannot use it again. You cannot recycle it. So yes, we have a kasha against Rabbi Yechanan. Okay. I mean, you can see already what the answer might be. Of course, by Ma'aser Sheni, by Demai, you're only dealing with it. You're right. The Ma'aser Sheni that you removed for basket B is not Mesuken, L'Ma'aser Rishon for basket B, but you're not taking it for basket B. You can be Machalik, but anyways, the Kasha is a Gavalik Kasha, and the Gemara leaves it open-ended question. The final clause in the final Mishnah in Halacha Daled, the Perik Aleph, we already established a couple of Mishnayos in ago that the whole obligation of the Mai is only if the purpose for which you purchased the food was for consumption, meaning for human consumption. And even if it was grown and produced for human consumption by the Ama'aretz. But if you, the Chaver, when you buy it from the Ama'aretz, you bought it for a non-consumption purpose, we learned in the Mishnah before, then it's exempted completely from the obligation of the Mai. And the Mishnah wanted to give a nuance to that. And that is that when you are making garments, there is the usage of oil. Some people put it on their fingers. Some people put it in the fiber. If you put it on the finger, the Mishnah says, Shemen, even though you're not eating it via mouth, but you're putting it on your body, like we said, anointing is tantamount to drinking, so it is considered you bought it for human consumption, and therefore chayiv b'demai. And In contrast, the Mishnah says, we're quoting the Mishnah, Masha hasoirek noisen batsemet, that which when you have wool fibers and you are putting oil in the wool to facilitate the combing, guys, some of that oil will end up on your hands, but you're not putting it on your hands. You're putting it on the wool. That's already so far removed that that's already a bottom in Hadamai. And what's the nafkamina? It's also going to end up on your hands. So the Gemara, my being zelos there, Gemara clarifies, yeah, it has to do with on what are you putting the oil. Zed, the first case, is the gardi, the weaver, al gav gufoy, he's putting it directly on his body. And yes, we consider it to be nullified in the body. Nullified in the body would mean it's like drinking. It's like drinking. However, it's the soidek, the comber, he's putting it on top of the wool. And yes, it's considered bottled, but bottled to the wool and not bottled to your body. I want to make 2 points. One point I think was made by Rabbi Blauner when I don't think we finalized that. We're not taking away the rule that sicha kishasiya, but it's not a hard and fast rule that is applicable the way people think it's applicable when they hear that statement. Limasha, a simple example. Someone mentioned about the cream. That's why someone here in the class mentioned about cream. Let's speak about chaylev. Just an example. Today we have all different types of creams, and it's not roi lachila. It's not considered meichel. But in the good old days, sometimes they would take animal fat chaylev that is asur ba'achila under the penalty of kares. Chaylev is muter bahana. The Torah says that these are clear psukim. Is a person allowed to anoint themselves with chaylev? So don't think that everyone will say no. It's not so simple. Even though chaylev is asur b'achila and muter bahana, but we're saying that sicha kishasiya, lav dafke, the rule that anointing is mamish like consumption, it applies over here. No question. If you want to determine that there's an issue of damai, the Chachamim did not put it on anything not during consumption, you're going to be more machmir. We're saying no, that if it's for anointing, sicha kishasiya. But to say that sicha kishasiya, mamish, lav dafka, that's going to be the case by using chaylev. And I'll tell you more, not only where it's lav dafka, where it's dafka lav. And the other case where we have a lot, I'm sure there are more cases, but what just came to mind is what about Yom Kippur? Guys, remember that on Yom Kippur, the Torah doesn't say the word fast. The Torah says ta'anu, inui, afflict, and inui means 5 things, but if you remember, the 5 things are not in the same category. The first of the 5 prohibitions of Yom Kippur is eating and drinking. We have to afflict ourselves by not eating and drinking, and for that, we all know that if a person, God forbid, eats and drinks, chayiv kares, right? Chayiv kares. Isur d'oraisa with a penalty. Then there are 4 other inuyim. One of the other 4 are resicha. Right? Now, first of all, there's a machlekes rishonim whether the other 4 inuyim is not to anoint your body, right? Not to wear leather shoes, not to have marital relations. Guys, what's the other one? Give me the other 4. Isur. Yeah, you can't anoint, can't smear your body, can't wear leather shoes. A married person, no person, but you can't have married
wash yourself,
and you can't wash yourself. Okay, thank you. And by the way, washing, just to know, washing and anointing is different, because washing, the purpose of washing is to take off dirt. By washing, we don't say sicha kishasiya, but by putting on cream, that's latainu. Okay. So here I go, very simple. First of all, by those 4, if sicha kishasiya, no one says that if a person will be sach gufay on Yom Kippur, they'll be chayiv kares. No one says that. And not only that, that's just, the Rambam holds that the other 4 is doiraisa. We learned this in the Rambam. Bali Tosfos generally hold it's midrabanan. I'll tell you more than that. This is something that Tosfos says. Tosfos says, remember we learned this, that how can it be doiraisa if anointing would be asad midoiraisa, like eating and drinking? If it would be asad midoiraisa, period, then how can there be exceptions? Right? A kala, I think within 30 days of her marriage, I think that's the din, and a melech, they are allowed to anoint themselves. The fact that there can be an exception, that was the Tosfos' raya against the Rambam, that it's only an Isur D'Rabbanan. If it would be an Isur D'Oraisa, there wouldn't be exceptions. But be that as it may, even the Tosfos, even the Rambam, there's no chiyuv at kares. So what I'm trying to say is that sicha kishasiya, yes, benegeya, this rule. First of all, there's a chiyuv of the mind. Then we have a exemption that if you bought it for non-human consumption, we're lenient. So, hold on, says that say the Chachamim, not all the way. That sicha is like human consumption, and you have to take off the mai. It doesn't mean that in all the other areas we view sicha mamish keseshir. That's the point I wanted to make. On this we say Chavra Hadran Allah Hakalin. We will come back to you, Perek Hakalin. How great is this? And we are now going to begin at this point. Perek Sheni Daf Yud Gimel Amud Beis Elu Devarim. And as we spoke on in the intro, Bekitzer, that were a couple of steps. First of all, obligation of the Mai only applies to produce that grows in Eretz Yisrael. Actually, Midoi Raisa, even Trumas Umaisres on Tevel only applies to produce that grows in Eretz Yisrael. Number two, if you purchase a product outside Eretz Yisrael, I know that we learned before Braisa about the donkey drivers. There are exceptions to what I'm saying, but the general rule is, and that's a good rule to remember, that you don't have to be suspicious. You don't have to be worried that the product that you bought, Mikaziv Ulamailo, was grown in Israel. Normally we say, if you are allowed to assume halachically that it grew in the locality that you bought it. Says the Mishnah, that's a great rule, but there has to be exceptions. And it's a common sense exception. In other words, it's not a gezeda. We're using our minds, and let's go all the way to the end in both directions. If there is a product that Eretz Yisrael is even blessed begashmits, so there are certain products of food that grows from Eretz Yisrael that are of superior quality that no other country can grow such a product. So if you buy that outside of Eretz Yisrael, you can't assume it was grown locally. That does not grow locally. That came from Eretz Yisrael. So therefore, if you buy it from the Mama Eretz, you're chayiv to separate the mayu. And in the reverse, if there is a product that is known that this only grows michutz la'aretz, even though you buy it locally, it's exempt from the mayu because everyone knows that it grew michutz la'aretz. That's the Mishnah Halacha Aleph of the second chapter, and we'll read it inside. Says the Mishnah like this: that yes, misasrim the mai b'chol makim, that they do need to have the mai separations taken from it, even though you bought it outside Eretz Yisrael. That's the b'chol makim. Now, by the way, b'chol makim means mikaziv u'lamaylam. The Rashi really on the right column, 7 lines from the top, points out that even though the Mishnah says the words b'chol makim, it doesn't mean mamish b'chol makim. It means besuria, meaning it means in the countries that are near Eretz Yisrael. The Mishnah is not implying that the Chazal had a zamasoida from God, that the products that we're going to mention, 5 products, that if they grow in Australia, they'll not be as good. We're not saying that. In other words, b'chol makim doesn't mean mamish b'chol makim. It means in the areas that surround Eretz Yisrael. That's what Rabbeinu HaKadosh is saying. The following 5 items, if you buy it in Syria, it doesn't only mean Syria, the Rambam. If you buy it in Babel, you know it grew in Israel. And what are these 5 products? Devela, pressed figs. Tamarim are dates. Cheruvim are carobs. The Gemara is going to point out those countries grew, but you can see it's inferior. You saw it. The real ones, the ones that are meshubach, even begashmias, you know it comes from that. It's Yisrael. Ha'oidus rice, how amazing is that? Good rice, and v'hakamainen kumin, pashut. Okay. Stam lahoyer, that, the shivas haminim from which you bring bikurim, right? So I get it. The figs and the dates are there. Why not carobs? In other words, we see from our Mishnah that it isn't only the shivas haminim, sheneshtabchu behem Eretz Yisrael. Rabbeinu HaKadosh is saying other items. Okay, gosh. Now,
what does it say? Why is it pressed figs, not figs?
Yeah. Because that's the way it was sold, Kavan. Because there was these things were very nutritious, and they didn't have a refrigerator. That's the way they preserved it. That was the halachah. And I'll go more than Kavan. The Gemara is going to go into details. The Gemara is going to actually point out more details that a certain type of fig you wouldn't know. No, it's not all figs. It's probably part of it. Okay. Now let's go in the other direction. Same thing in the direction. Even though the Mishnah mentioned oides, the oides in the ratio was a special oides. It was a superior oides. However, the type of rice that's inferior, that regularly grew then shebachutz la'aretz, and no matter how bad the farmer was in Israel, the land of Israel can never produce something so bad. So here also in the reverse, that kol hamishtamish mimenu, the word is even if you buy it in Eretz Yisrael, and guys, let me say something, just to repeat what I said before in the introduction. Produce that de facto grew outside Israel, if you bought it in Eretz Yisrael, based on the rule that we learned in the previous chapter, that halachically you assume when you buy something in the city that it came from the vicinity of this city, because of loy plug or because of maras ayin, you will have to separate the my separations. You bought it in Israel, separate it. But if there is a product that there is no maras ayin, in other words, no one will assume it grew in Israel. This type of rice is so inferior. Everyone knows. So then, even though you bought it in the Holy Land, you won't have to separate it. That's kol hamishtamish mimenu pater. I'm sorry, which is again the kol hamishtamish mimenu pater. Gevaldik. Okay, these are the two dinim of the Mishnah. Look inside the Mara folder, the last one in the Mishnah. Right, from 3 lines from the top. Because the minkar shapid, that's the important. It's everyone, it's easily discernible that this is that which grew from chutz la'aretz. It's so different than the rice that grows in Israel, you won't confuse it. Here it says the Mara folder, Iko minayu ba'aretz. That which grew in chutz la'aretz has similar items, similar. What grows in Israel is similar. If what grows be'eretz Yisrael and what grows b'chul is similar, so va'asi le'achlufe the damalois chutz la'aretz. And therefore, there is this rule, like we mentioned, when you buy a product in Israel, you have to separate the mai. Maybe it grew b'chutz la'aretz. Maybe not. It's only when you know for sure, and no one will make a confusion. Okay, says the Gemara. So Rabbi Blauner is asking, hold on, the whole Gemara is only a suffix, even if it grows equal here and equal there. Maybe it grew there, and the answer is because you bought it in Israel. No, there is this chazaka, like what you buy here grew around it. That's what we learned in the previous. Unless, by the way, we learned the Bryce in the last chapter that even before this chapter, that certain donkey drivers, that if it was transported in a certain way, there are certain presumptions that will change. But without that, when you buy a product, the world, by the way, changed today. Because of the transportation, the ease of transportation. But normally that was the rule. You buy something in a location, you assume it came from that location. Okay, says the Gemara. We're going to quote a Mishnah in Maislis. That's the over there. Haman Taninan. The Mishnah in Maislis speaks about certain type of products. Shum balbechi. Balbechi literally means you cry when you eat the garlic. In other words, it was a very sharp type of garlic. Balbechi also is the name of a location. The Becca Valley. Becca Valley is in Lebanon. Becca Valley is in biblical Israel. But again, what counts is whether the oil bubble settled there and they did not. So this type, but as we'll see in a moment, clear. Even though some of these items have a name to it of a location, it's not about the name of the location. We'll see clearly. It's about that these products were so inferior that either they were mamish hefker, and they also, by the way, they also grow. They grow stam. They don't need effort to grow, which is why they're very bad. Even if they grew in your field, oh, that's a big rule. It's also hefker if you don't cultivate it. Because if I have a field and certain things are growing secondary, that's not why I planted my field. And I care so little for it, I make no effort to weed it, I'm not cultivating it, that has a din of hefker. I want to add another nuance. I know that we learned this in the previous Masechta, but for people that might have come in right now, because we don't learn this so much in the Babli, Number one, there's a rule that hefker is exempt from ISIS, even if it grows in Israel, in Eretz Yisrael. When does it have to be hefker for it to be exempted from ISIS? The obligation of being ma'asid is only when there is gemar malacha, when the item is completely ready. If it was grown to be sold, ready to be sold. If the item was grown to be consumed, it's only really a finished product when it entered your home. That is when you are obligated to tithe it. But there is another step prior. There is a time when there is no obligation to tithe it, but if you were toidem or ma'asid, it was effective. From when it reached a third of its growth. Never when it's connected. But if any item, that's the general rule, from when it reached a third of its growth, if it was harvested, even though it's inferior, but it reached a third, so it's food. You're not chayiv, but if you were toidem, it was effective. If you harvested something prior to a third of its growth, it's not. So I want you to know there is a window from a third of its growth until gemar malacha. During this window, if at any time the item became hefker, it's exempt from Trumas U'Maises, even if it's a product that grows in Eretz Yisrael. And it's a biblical exemption. That's what this Bryce is referring to. It's referring to items. I know even if Balbechi is a name of a location, the reason why it's exempt, not because it came from there, because it's hefker, just to make it clear. So there's a unique shum called Shum Balbechi. Then you have Batzel Shel Richba. Again, Richba, the Marafel, the Sashay Makar. But Richba also means flowing tears. It's a type of onion, even if it primarily grew in a place called Richba. It also grew in Eretz Yisrael. It was called Batzel Richba because it was very sharp and very sharp. I know we have some Sfardim with us that the sharper the better, right? They have these jalapenos that when you touch it with your hand, you begin to cry. That's not healthy for normal people, and the halachic presumption is that even if it grew in your field, you so don't care about it, it has a din of hefker. So it's not about the location; it has to do with it's so inferior, it's bad. Grisin hakilkin, Sicilian. By the way, Sicilian is not Italian Sicilian, but it's Turkey Sicilian. So again, it's a name of a location. There was a certain split bean that's very inferior. And the final one here is Va'adoshim HaMitzviyos, Egyptian lentils. Again, it's not because they grew in Egypt. These also grew in Eretz Yisrael, as the Marafulda writes in middle of the Amid. It's around 16 lines from the top. Va'adoshim HaMitzviyos, Roishon Echad Chad. How can you identify them? Is because they're not symmetrical. It's like an egg. One top is sharp, is pointier. The other one is wider. In all of these, by lentils, by eggs, it's good, guys. If you remember by chulin, an egg that is that way, that is symmetrical, is a siman. It came from a bird that's tummy. I think we have 3 siman. One of the simanim, I remember the other siman is that by tummy birds, it's flipped. The yellow is on the outside and the white is on the inside. And there was one more. Maybe Danny can remember. I don't remember. But anyways, this is the lentil. So says the Marafulda, uminim halalu, all of the ones that mentioned. All of them, min hamidbar hein, they grow in the wild. V'cheskosan min hahefker. Why? Because she'ein nam nizroim begina. People don't plant it in their gardens. I just want to add, not against, that even if it grew in your garden, since this is a type that would grow uncultivated, and it had so first of all, anything that grows uncultivated is very cheap, because it's not a big yichus, it grows everywhere by itself. And it's so inferior, even if it would grow in your gina, you wouldn't care about it. You wouldn't give attention to it. And therefore, dinoi hefker. Now, if we know the owner cared about it, that's different. But if you don't know, that's what the Mishnah is saying.
Rabbi.
Yes.
Is this connecting at all to the machlokes we learned in the beginning of the Masechta between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish with hefker versus like there's so much of it that it's you don't care about it? Like it sounds like these products.
The information that I shared, I knew from there, Danny. Correct, but it's not connected to these items. It's not the mai. One second. We're not speaking about the mai, Danny. We're saying that even the general obligation of Trumas U'Maisvis is something that was never placed on it because of the din of hefker. If you know that the person cultivated it, then you're chayiv. I know it's midrabanan, according to most Rishonim, these items are not chayiv midoraisa, but so what? Chayiv midrabanan. We're not even speaking about the mayat. Okay, now comes along a brayso, and the brayso says, the brayso is not on here. The brayso is there on the Mishnah on Maisres. Haminim halalu al yidei sheyesh kayoytze behem be'eretz Yisrael. There are other varieties of garlic, not the ones that we mentioned. There are other varieties of onions, the 4 items, that they grow in gardens in Eretz Yisrael. So when the Braisa said shum, it needed to specify which shum is exempt from Maisris, Balbechi. That's what the Braisa says. And therefore, what is he trying to say? Avol, he's going to speak about 3 types of nuts that not the Balbechi type doesn't grow. None of the subspecies of these nuts grow in Israel. Avol, who eats ha'il tzarin, one type of nut, hazelnuts, v'hapis thicken, pistachios, if that's the type, v'ha'itz trovoilin, and pine cones, cave-in pictures. Al yidei she'ein kayoytze be'eretz Yisrael. No varieties of these species grow in Eretz Yisrael. We know it's like the rice in the Mishnah Iro. If you buy it, you knew it grew outside Israel. Now, all of this, the way we will learn the Gemara, is presenting a kasha to the Mishnah. What's the kasha to the Mishnah? Since the Braisa is telling you that items that for sure don't grow be'eretz Yisrael, no type, it's so obvious that they are exempt from Trumas or Maisres that the Mishnah in Maisres did not even need to mention it, right? The Mishnah needed to mention the batzel of Balbechi, the shum Balbechi. So now, why wouldn't we say the same in the reverse? That items that only grow in Eretz Yisrael for sure are chayiv, and also the Mishnah should not need to mention it. Our Mishnah began to mention the Vela, the Tamarim, the Charuvim, the Oiris, and the Kamun. Why did the Mishnah even have to mention it? Just like the Mishnah in Maisres did not even need to mention items that are exempt, because obviously they are exempt because they don't grow the Eretz Yisrael. So why didn't Rebbe use the same logic in the reverse, that items that only grow in Eretz Yisrael, even if you buy it b'chol makayim, why? That's the way we're going to understand the kasha of the Gemara. No, since it's obviously chayiv, why did the Mishnah even have to say it? Amar Rabbi Yavin. No. Things that are obviously potted don't have to be mentioned. Things that are obviously chayiv do have to be mentioned. You know why? Because the chiddush of our Mishnah is not that they are chayiv if you buy it in Eretz Yisrael. No, the chiddush of the Mishnah is b'chol makayim. And we did learn in the previous chapter that items that you buy in a certain locality, the assumption is it grew around that locality. So even though these items taka only grow in Eretz Yisrael, one would have thought that once the Chachamim said that when you buy items outside of Eretz Yisrael, they are exempt. And let me add the words of Rabbi Blauner. Don't forget, we're speaking about the Mai over here. We're not. Our Mishnah, Maisres is speaking about Ultramus or Maisres. Our Mishnah is speaking only about the Mai. One taka might have thought that these items we know only grow in Eretz Yisrael. Don't forget that the Amoritz is telling you I separated the Trumas or Maisres. We don't believe him. Roiv are believable. It's a minority. One might have thought it's exempt. Rebbe has to write what's chayiv. Just because he doesn't have to write what's potted, he has to write what's chayiv. That's the answer the way we learn the Gemara. So Amar Abavin, Hadom Asnisam. The Mishnah over here, Chilufa means it's the opposite. The opposite means when you don't have to write something is exempt, it doesn't mean you don't have to write something is chayiv. Here you have to write something that's chayiv. Don't forget, you're buying it out of that Eretz Yisrael. Our Mishnah, it's so great, it's so superior. You don't even physically, everyone sees in the you see the uniqueness of Eretz Yisrael. And on top of that, let me add, but you're buying it b'chutz la'aretz. Maybe one would have thought that b'chutz la'aretz, there's no obligation of the Mai. We're speaking about the Mai. So we have another few minutes. Let's go right. Now, the Mishnah is saying, the Mishnah, the first 5, The vela, tomarim, charuvim, oidis, and kamel. Unique. What? You don't have these items. B'chutz la'aretz. Frek the Gemara about the vela, b'boitzra and batzra. You can find the velas. You can find the pressed figs. So the Gemara answers no shchikai, that they are crushed. In other words, when you press them, when you press something, that's the answer to you, Kavan. What happens to them? If it's inferior, it gets crushed. It cracks, right? And if it's superior, it's so moist, it's so zaftig, that it only gets smaller, it gets pressed or crushed. What happens to us when we have challenges in life? Pressed or crushed? Actually, by a yid, crushed, it should not happen. If it already happened to crush, then you have the kasas lamoy. But maybe if you would be a tzaddik, you wouldn't experience the bad to be on that level because you are more connected to the emes from God's perspective. Maybe if you're a tzaddik, you're good already. It's for us, we get crushed. Okay, next. Commenting, you're talking about dates. What? Dates don't grow in Alexandria? What are you talking about? Answer the Gemara, no. The ones in Alexandria are dakikin inun. They're very thin. I know we're living in a world that thin is in, thin is out. No, you want the juicy ones. It's like from a different category. Now here we have be'eri. I don't know if be'eri over here, was smiling, is the be'eri. I think be'eri is taka inside Eretz Yisrael. I think it was settled by Oila Bavel. I think that Gaza was settled by Oila Bavel. Not only by Oila Mitzrayim, but anyways. So where this Be'edi is, the Pnei Moshe says, look inside the last line of the Pnei Moshe. He writes Mekayim is mechutz la'aretz. But here again, you have in Be'edi, you have caribs. No, not as good. Gidud hul. They're already cracked. And cracking is a sign of dryness, of a lack of lachluchis. Let's chapter the last line in Dafyud Dalit. Because what about the oides, right? The oides and the kamel. So the oides is unique. That grows in chulta. Again, chulta, the Pnei Moshe wrote on the bottom of Amid Beis, of Gimel Amid Beis, that it's a makim chutz la'aretz. So the Gemara says, no, that the type of rice that grows in chulta, this is for kevan, achtar hu simukum. I don't know, green, you Persians have your yellow rice. Exactly. All the good colors. It's not good rice. It's green. It's red. It's yellow. It's purple. It's cheaper. Verstehst? But no, that's not that. It's so. That's common in Cyprus. How great is that? No, the one in Cyprus is crooked. The one in Eretz Yisrael is straight glatik. Bottom line is that, yeah, they're unique. And even though you bought them outside of Eretz Yisrael, they came from there. The Chachamim were still mechayev for you to separate the mai. If you bought it from an Amaretz, the Valdik Chevra to be continued.